welcome into the Fantasy Football Podcast, Brian. Today we're doing an episode that the hardcore fantasy players probably won't benefit a lot from, but we're going to be doing the basically, how do you play fantasy football questions? We've put together some tips for the beginning audience members. For those searching to join a league or for those wanting to start one, there are some basic tips that are good to know before jumping right into one.
Should be a fun episode. I mean, if you're not already playing fantasy football, something's wrong with you, but this is a good step to learning how to start one.
Well, the good thing is you can literally start at any age. All you need to do is start before week one. Even though all the fantasy leagues tell you you can start after the season starts, it's really not the same.
No, you need to have at least a couple weeks before you even want to start a fantasy football season. If you start in the middle of the season, you're not really a fantasy footballer.
No. So as our basic intro, I'm John. I'm your monotone master. We're here with our co-host Brian Tambo, the Fantasy Force here. You can find us on social media, TikTok and Instagram at WhyYou'reWrongFFB, and on Twitter as You'reWrongFFB. And just going into some impactful news, we're now past the June 1st deadline, and the significance of that is NFL teams can now trade or release players who have 2 more years left on that contract versus 1 year. So what that basically means is this is the time period where we might get a better update on Aaron Rodgers and the Julio Jones scenario. So those are the 2 big pins we're waiting to fall for the offseason. So which one do you want to dive into first?
Let's start with Aaron Rodgers. I feel like that's a very interesting topic.
Okay, so for the first time in his 16-year career so far, Brian, he did not report to OTAs for the Packers. He was actually vacationing while his team was getting off-season activities going.
I saw that. He was vacationing with Miles Teller and his girlfriend, maybe / wife, not sure. But I saw that he just does not care for the Packers, does not care for football, and wants to be traded immediately.
So, and the GM has held his ground so far, claiming that he is not going to trade Rodgers at the moment. So I feel like you just have 2 very stubborn people, and it's going to be very miserable for Packers fans throughout the offseason.
I feel like they're just holding him hostage. Like, the man clearly wants to leave. Will they let him leave? I mean, clearly they don't want to see him go, but we're going to see what happens. I guarantee he probably ends up on another team when the season starts, but we'll see.
I think what's funny, this is the rumor been going on so far, is that Madden hasn't released anything about the cover athlete this year because it's supposed to be Aaron Rodgers, but they don't want to release it and then have him get traded to a different team because then they'd have to repackage all of their games.
I saw the same thing. Honestly, what they should do is they should just put Derrick Henry on the cover, just let everything go, but clearly they want the MVP on there. They probably already asked him. They're probably like, all right, wait out, see what team I go to first. If something doesn't get finalized, I mean, Madden comes out in August, I think, so they need to get the ball rolling or they're going to be completely screwed.
Honestly, they should probably do some backup options. Like Derrick Henry would be good. Josh Allen would be a great cover athlete.
I like Josh Allen.
Kyler Murray would be a great cover athlete.
Definitely not Jonathan Taylor.
Definitely not a random running back. Antonio Gibson.
Definitely not Antonio Gibson. Maybe Ryan Fitzmagic.
Fitzmagic would be fantastic.
I think that'd be a good one.
I think people would buy it just to have a Fitzmagic copy.
I would certainly buy it.
Yeah, I like that. But now the other big pin, Julio Jones. He said he was going to be out of Atlanta on live TV. I don't think he knew he was on live TV when he was on the phone, but now it's out there. He wants to go to a team with a chance to win the championship like every veteran player. There's been rumor mills on Seattle, but there's also been rumors on half of the NFL.
I've seen rumors on when the initial trade rumors started. I saw it was the Patriots, and then I saw it was the Titans. And the Titans seems pretty reasonable, and the Patriots also seems very reasonable if he wants to win. I mean, if he wants to win and he's going to Seattle with a really tough division this year, don't know if it's the best option. But Julio Jones and DK Metcalf, yeah, they'd be pretty good, but I don't know if we want to jump the gun just yet to see if he's going to Seattle.
I mean, he'd be nice on New England if Tom Brady was still a quarterback.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Julio Jones probably will end up playing 3 games this year because he's going to fall to injury. So no matter what team gets him, they're going to expect him to probably play maybe half the season.
Right. Now, I would like to eventually do another mock draft with you, Brian, but we really have to wait for one of these 2 at least, or hopefully both of them, to have a new destination by the time we do a next one, because both of those guys leaving will create fantasy impact on players on their teams that they're leaving and teams they're going to once that all gets going. So it's almost like we kind of have to wait before we can really do any further analysis with drafts yet.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, we got a couple We got what, 2 months left, 3 months left until the season actually starts. I guarantee they'll be signed within the next month or so.
Yeah, we got about 2 months till the start of the preseason.
Yeah.
Other news, Brian, though, this is good news for both of us. Cowboys tight end Blake Jarwin is progressing from his ACL tear suffered during week 1 of last season.
The Blake out.
It's coming. If you're going for that super late tight end in fantasy, Blake Jarwin's your guy.
I mean, Dalton Schultz was like kind of decent.
Kind of relevant.
A
little bit.
But Blake Jarwin's skill level is beyond them. I drafted him in all my leagues, expecting him to be great. He caught a couple passes right off the start, and then he tore his ACL, and I was like, there goes the season. But with that high-powered offense, it's kind of tough to not be fantasy relevant, no matter how good or bad you are. So I expect Blake Jarwin to bounce back this year, hopefully, and then he'll be fantasy relevant again.
Another tight end news. Delaney Walker, who sat out last season, has been working out with the 49ers. If they sign him, I think it's just another name in the mix of guys below George Kittle. Even though they played the same position, I don't think it takes away from George Kittle at all if they add Delaney.
How old is Delaney Walker now?
He's 30-something.
He's getting old.
Yeah.
I mean, he lost his job to Jonnu Smith, and then Jonnu Smith was there for a little bit in the Titans, and then he kind of just went dark after that. I mean, Delaney Walker was very fantasy relevant 5 years ago, but I don't think it has any effect on George Kittle and the 49ers offense whatsoever.
And maybe just makes it less like... I think they're just basically he's an insurance policy in case they lose Kittle or someone else again.
I think Tim Tebow might have a better season than Delaney Walker.
That's instant. Tim Tebow has some of the highest selling merchandise right now being on the Jaguars.
Hey, he's looking pretty big. I don't know. he might be pretty good. Well, we'll see.
I'm looking forward to that progression during the preseason. But now to get into the meat of the whole episode, Brian. Tips for beginners. So let me just ask you a quick question. What is fantasy football?
Fantasy football is a fake league that you draft players in the real NFL and you get points out of it. And it's scored off of touchdowns, passing yards, receiving yards, all the different offensive stats around there. No one cares about defense. It's more focused on the offensive side. And pretty much the highest score against a head-to-head wins every week. And you go on to the playoffs and on to the championship and so forth. And it's very competitive and very fun against your friends.
That's an awesome, very general definition of fantasy football. But there's like 3 pillars below that kind of just isn't included in the game. At the end of the day, fantasy football is basically odds-based gambling. It can also be done for fun and for free. You don't have to put money on it if your league doesn't want to, but a lot of sports fans who play fantasy football love sports betting or just love like basically the I told you so mentality. So some people like to put a little bit of money into the league, ranging from like $10 to thousands of dollars, just kind of the comfort level of everyone else. It's also community-based, where it allows you to keep connected with a lot of friends or coworkers that you don't see all the time. And it also amplifies the NFL games themselves. For example, a game between 2 non-playoff teams are both 5-10. The game doesn't matter. It can still have an impact on the fantasy league that you're in. So it makes every single game a little bit more exciting.
It's very ego-based, too. Again, going back to telling your friend off. You beat your friend on a Sunday and you see him on Monday. It's definitely a good feeling. I don't really care about the money, but if you see your friend, you beat him by 1 point, then he's going to be crying for the rest of the week.
And you can remind him about it every single time.
Every single time.
All right. So tip number 1, Brian. Assembling the league. It's important to find a group of people to start a league or to join one yourself. I find that it's more fun to play with people you know versus randos. And you can still join a random league, but you're more at risk of people not caring and also not being able to communicate with the other league members as well. If you join a group of randos, there's less likely of a chance that the entire group itself will still be competitive throughout the season.
Yeah, because I'd say that when you draft initially and you have friends that are in the league compared to if you don't have friends in the league, you're playing with a bunch of randos, you're probably not going to do a lot of trades. The team that you have when you play with randos probably will be the team that you have at the end of the season in comparison to if you play with your friends. You could be competitive. You can make trades all the time. You know, a lot of free agent moves happen. A lot of different competitive aspects go into it. There's no money in randos and there's money with your friends. So there's a lot more benefit to playing with your friends, I would say, than playing with a random league.
Definitely. Tip number 2. There's many platforms out there, and they all similar rules, but they can differ between the platforms. So I'd say the big two are Yahoo and ESPN. People feel very strongly about one or the other.
Yahoo is the best, just letting you know.
If you use ESPN, the only benefit to ESPN is that there's Gamecast, and you can basically see the play-by-play as it's happening, but the advantage to Yahoo is that you can literally watch some of the games from your phone.
From a mobile perspective, if you want the best fantasy football app out there, use Yahoo. This is Why You're Wrong Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm telling you why you're wrong for using ESPN mobile app. Play on Yahoo. That's it.
There are some listeners out there that really need to hear this message out there. They know who they are because we've had many discussions about why Yahoo is superior to ESPN.
I play ESPN leagues and I almost feel like my team's worse just because I'm playing on a worse platform.
And it's also it's the biggest thing is if I have three if I have three Yahoo leagues and there's one ESPN league, then I have to switch to a different app because I'm all in one app.
I agree. I think Yahoo should be the only app out there, but people have their own decisions, so be it.
All right, Brian. So how are the league set up? Because I know that answer myself. I want to ask you just so you can kind of walk through the three options.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between standard, half PPR, full PPR, and what does PPR even stand for?
PPR is points per reception. So pretty much if you have a receiver, let's go with the name receiver. Let's go Julio Jones. So say Julio Jones were to get 10 catches for 100 yards in a football game. If you're playing in a standard league, those catches do not count for any points. You get 1 point per 10 yards. So that means he would end with 10 points. If it was a half point PPR league, you would take his catches into an equation because it's points per reception. However, since it's half point PPR, that means it's 0.5 per catch. So he would have 15 points. If it was 10 catches for 100 yards in a full point PPR league, he would have 10 points from catches and 10 points from yards. Therefore, he would have 20 points. So the benefit of it is that if you play in a PPR league or a half-point PPR league, you want to find guys that actually catch the ball in comparison to a standard league where you might just find those guys who get a lot of yards but not a lot of catches.
Right. I think as a beginner, I would lean towards a standard league because then it's another layer or two of knowledge you need to know about players. And if you're coming into fantasy not knowing a lot to begin with, a standard league might be easier year one, and then once you get a better understanding of how the game works and different players, I would then upgrade to PPR or full PPR, depending on your preference.
I think when I started, I've been playing for 13 years now, and I started off in standard league for about 5 to 6 years, and then we started realizing that, there's a lot more competitiveness when it comes to PPR. So definitely start with standard and then work your way up if you want to start making a more competitive league.
I really prefer the half PPR because I don't want, then you get into people like Mike Evans, who in a standard league could be wide receiver 10. In a full PPR, he could be wide receiver 20 just because the dude catches touchdowns but does not get a lot of passing volume.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
So another big thing to think about is how the points are distributed in the league. Things to note is passing yards and passing touchdowns are typically worth less due to higher volume in most leagues. For example, a regular touchdown is 6 points, but if it's a passing touchdown, it's only 4 points. One thing to note, another reason why ESPN sucks, is some leagues will take away points from kickers if they miss a kick.
I never played in a league like that, and I hope to never play in a league like that because that is just crazy.
It's almost rude.
As a kicker, you don't get a lot of points from a kicker, and you get valued for the good kickers that you have, like Younghoe Koo, Jason Sanders, Greg the Leg a few years ago. Great kickers all time. Even Harrison Butker, I'll throw him in there a couple years ago. But if you're discredited for a missed kick, that's just mean.
It kind of haunts the perspective of you because the missed kick cannot be your fault. It could be blocked. It could be so windy that you had no chance to begin with, where the kicker is forced to take that kick no matter what. So why should people be penalized if the kicker has no chance to begin with?
Exactly. Don't take Cody Parkey. That's all I'm going to say.
All right, another big note is no championships should be played in the final week of the season. This is because real NFL teams may rest their players if their playoff seeding is confirmed, which completely affects fantasy managers with players on those teams. For example, if a team has the 1 seed locked up, they have valuable fantasy players most likely on their team. If they rest those players and you're in your championship week that week, you're going to be missing out on your top guys that got you to the championship.
I've never been the commissioner of a league before, but I don't even know if default settings puts it at week 17. But if it does put week 17 as your default championship, you need to put that back to week 16, like you said, because players who are just killing it in their division, like say take the New England Patriots for a long time. If you had Tom Brady or Julian Edelman or Wes Welker, Randy Moss, all time back in the day, they probably already won the division and they probably are the 1 seed, so they're probably not going to play their players in week 17, which can alter fantasy championships in the end.
I just want to make one note. We now have 18 weeks of football, so you want to make sure your championship is a week 17 this year.
That's a good point.
Not week 16.
Yes.
And especially not week 18.
Definitely not week 18. Week 17. I mean, we'll see. Maybe week 17 it could alter a couple players, but I doubt it. I mean, week 17 should be the championship week.
Now, the one thing that now I actually think about now when we're talking about it is because of that extra week, you have to, the league commissioners out there, look at when the playoffs start, because I think bye weeks are now an extra week into the season.
That's a good point, actually. That is a good point. I mean, we'll have to look into that a little bit more, but I think that's right.
Yeah. Here's tip number 3. The league setup in itself. How many people are actually in this league? Because that completely affects the pool of players you're able to pick from / draft from. 8 and 10 league teams, I feel like, are the most common. I think 8 is great for beginners because it kind of limits the amount of players you really need to know going into it. And it still allows you to have a great players left in the free agent pool instead of having to know exactly who's on your bench versus who's in the pool itself.
Yeah, I started off with 8 people, and I think it's good for when you're just starting because then again, it's kind of tough to draft a bad team in an 8-team league. Once you get towards the 10 and the 12s, that's where it gets a little bit more competitive, a little more tough because you're drafting, some no-name guys that could potentially be really good, or they could just be so bad that you just cut them probably in the first week.
And if you're a beginner, they could have a bad week or two, but yet you don't know that they're going to be good later on, and you accidentally cut them, and then someone else picks them up, and then you just kind of get screwed. So if you're really just starting out, aim for an 8 or maybe 10-team league. Move up to like 12 or even 12 plus, like the 14, 16s out there, if you feel comfortable enough with your fantasy football knowledge.
Yeah, I would say that's right. I mean, anything 12 plus, you're kind of getting into a dangerous territory. You're probably drafting,
even like
some
pros
snappers out there that barely play running back. It's going to be real tough to draft in a 14-team league.
So another thing to look at is what is the starting roster made up of? For example, a standard roster is 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 receivers, a tight end, a flex player, a kicker, and a defense. But a lot of people might have this question, Brian. Could you tell me what is a flex player?
A flex player is a wide receiver, a running back, or a tight end mix. So essentially you can draft all these guys, fill up your roster with your QB, your 2 RBs, your 2 wide receivers, and your tight end. And then you could just draft a whole bench and you could put one of those guys into your flex spot, which is a really nice thing because you could either stack up 3 RBs, you could stack up 3 wide receivers, or you could go with like a Travis Kelce, George Kittle combo and put one of them in your flex and one of them at your tight end.
How many bench spots should I be aware of?
That's a good point. I mean, how many should you care about? Probably like 4, I would say. I mean, anything over 4. You're always going to have a bench spot that just doesn't even matter. Always, because you usually drop a guy like per week, try to pick up someone that you actually need. But I would say around like 4.
Okay. Because I think when we do some episodes where you get into the specifics of players of the bench, we're going to do a whole advanced tip strategy on so many different aspects of actually drafting, looking at players, and picking stuff up. But for the beginners out there, the bench spots are important in the sense that they're guys that you can put into your lineup if someone gets hurt, if you need a last-minute guy because someone's not playing in that game. That's when your bench players become very valuable to you.
Like my team last year, all of them got hurt, so I had to plug and play my bench the entire time. And the nice thing is sometimes they put IR spots, so you can put someone that's hurt on an IR spot, and then you can add more people on your bench, and then you keep filling that bench up just in case there's bye weeks, injuries, whatever it may be.
And the nice thing about an IR spot is it doesn't count against your bench. But the common rule for the IR spot is once they're cleared from the NFL IR, then they become a bench player again.
And then you would have to drop the person just to get them back on your bench.
Right. So tip number 4, Brian, player rankings. I got some dumb questions for you that we both know the answers to, but these are questions that new beginning fantasy players might have, and they're valid questions if you've never played fantasy before.
Mm-hmm.
So, Brian, should I draft based off of Madden rankings?
No. You shouldn't. You might get lucky, but definitely don't do that.
So, fantasy is based off of player production, not talent. I'm not saying that less talented players are better than the more talented players, but in the roles of the fantasy world, a less talented player on a better offensive team could give you more fantasy production than a more talented player on a less productive team.
Yeah, I mean, there's good Madden players out there for sure, but that does not equate over to real football. I mean, looking at stats is definitely a lot more relevant than looking at if someone's really good in Madden.
Right. Another dumb question, Brian. Should I draft the big name players?
Not always, no. I mean, I would say that, like, there's a lot of big name players out there that were relevant, like, 7 years ago that are not relevant today. So you got to make sure you know where they stand today.
So you're saying I shouldn't draft AJ Green?
No, you should not draft AJ Green.
I shouldn't draft Larry Fitzgerald.
Larry Fitzgerald's on his way to a wheelchair.
I shouldn't draft Deshaun Jackson.
Deshaun Jackson is also on his way to a wheelchair and probably isn't as fast as he was like 6 years ago.
All right. Another less dumb question, but still a question that someone might be asking. Should I just use a top 200 fantasy list for drafting?
No, because, I mean, for a scenario like David Montgomery this year is going to be a top running back. David Montgomery, as any person that's played fantasy football for a long time, knows that he's probably not going to be that elite guy that he was at the end of the season just because he had an easy schedule. They got a tough schedule this upcoming year. People are going to draft him solely because his rankings are high, but you're probably not going to get the same return out of it. Or someone like Austin Eckler, who's low in his drafts, you might want to draft Austin Eckler a little bit higher than he is in rankings because he has a lot of upside in the offense he's playing in.
But David Montgomery finished as running back 4 last year, Brian.
Yeah, but David Montgomery had a very easy schedule. These are the things you need to be able to equate into your rankings and understand that maybe he wasn't that good. He was just playing some of the worst defenses in the NFL.
And another thing is the rankings might be based on a variety of factors, whereas there could be a bunch of quarterbacks up at the top. Everyone knows quarterbacks are going to score a lot of fantasy points, so they may be super high in the rankings of a top 200 list, but it doesn't mean you should be taking them over other positions to start.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it's almost research on your own and find multiple sources to get a non-biased opinion on players before you start making decisions.
Or just ask someone who's also played in the fantasy football league and see if they can give you their rankings and how they're going to draft. Just make sure that you're not in the same league because they probably might try to screw you.
Tip number 5, Brian. Mock draft and draft settings. So a good thing to think about is how does the league draft? Because you've got a snake draft or you have an auction draft. How is the order of the draft spots decided? Is it online or is it in person? Between a snake draft or an auction draft, Brian, what's the difference between the two and which one do you prefer?
I prefer a snake draft. I think the most default way to do it is a snake draft. And essentially what it is if you have a 10-team league, and I have the first pick and you have the 10 pick. I would draft first. I would end up taking Christian McCaffrey, and then it goes 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way down to 10. You get the 10 pick. You end up taking someone like Tyreek Hill, and then most people would probably think goes right back to me for my pick because I was the 1 pick. No, you pick the next pick, and so forth, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, until you get all the way down to the bottom. I think that's the best way to pick. I mean, that's how most drafts usually are. In an auction league, I mean, I've never played an auction league, but from what I understand is that it's a budget that's set and every player has a certain price and you need to be able to fill out your lineup depending on how much money you have. And it's still out of a 1 out of 10 ranking and you still have your draft picks, but there's prices that go to different players.
Right. I feel like that would be so complicated that most players definitely lean towards snake. Auction could be fun, but it's something you might want to experiment with before you just jump into it blindly.
Yeah, it might be fun just to do in like a random league and just try it out. But unless you guys are like super competitive and like love auction leagues, I mean, go for it. But if you want a default standard fantasy football league, go with the snake draft.
All right. Then we've got these things called mock drafts, Brian. Could you walk me through what a mock draft is?
A mock draft is a draft that you pretty much can pick any position you want, and you draft with a bunch of random people across the world and say, I want the 3 pick and I want to draft solely to know who I'm going to get for a team on the 3 pick. You can draft a fake team and you can see what your team would show it to be. And you can also do the 4 pick, the 7 pick, the 8 pick, whatever you want it to be, and see like, all right, if I get this position in my real draft, these are the guys I should expect to be taking at this point. And that's kind of the benefit of it.
So it's definitely one of those things you really want to practice a few times, at least from every single spot. Because a lot of fantasy platforms, you don't find out until 10 minutes before the draft starts what pick you're going to get. And that's not enough time to run through several different mock drafts. So it's good to do, I'd say, at least 3 different drafts from every single spot, just to know where guys might be going, you might be reaching for, you might be getting at a bargain, you might have to just reach for just to get to make sure that he's on your team. Because there's a lot of different things that can happen in the middle of a draft. And I think it's always good to know at least 3 players in each round that you'd like to target, just so you have a sense of what your team might look like if the guys you want in those rounds go before you have the chance to take them.
That's a good point.
It's also, the thing about mock drafts is to help you not tilt or panic, as we like to call it, in the real draft. The more you do mock drafts, the more you have a better idea of what happens if I don't get the guy I really want. So that way you don't panic and mess up your whole draft during the real draft of making your team.
It's like stretching on someone like Antonio Gibson in the 3rd round. If you watch the other video from last week or a couple weeks ago, whenever this is going to go live, I stretched on Antonio Gibson because I knew he wasn't going to fall back around.
Okay.
So
why was he going to go fall back around, Brian?
I mean, because you probably would have ended up taking him. So I mean, I had to do what's right for my team, and we came up with a really good, solid team. I wish it was my real team, but that's not until a couple months from now.
We will do an episode later where we dive more deep into draft strategies, and that is one of them. So look forward to that coming out in the next few weeks. But also, I think one thing to know, which people get really hung up on, and it really annoys me for the people who get hung up on this, is don't read into the draft grade of the platform that it gives you at the end of the draft. It's completely based off their rankings on where you took players compared to where they have them ranked. For example, teams that are given C grades can easily win championships, while teams with A+ grades can easily miss playoffs.
I had the highest draft grade in our league last year, and I finished in 7th, so there you go.
Because it's basically based off of who you get for week 1. It's impossible for these platforms to really know what's going to happen in the season.
And injuries happen too, like my entire team. I got injured, and then I finished 7th, so.
Okay. That's your little note you're going to put on for the entire offseason?
I mean, I did have 8 guys that got hurt, but we're not going to talk about it. Finishing 7th, we're coming back next year. We're going to win it all, so it doesn't matter.
Looking forward to that, Perrin. Tip number 6. Follow the NFL news. The league is not won at the draft. As we just mentioned, there are injuries, there are trades, and there are off-field incidents that can impact players. For example, players going down to injury that can sabotage your entire season if you're not prepared is losing Nick Chubb and Austin Eckler in the first week within a few minutes of each other. Or you can have players who lose value because their teammates got injured. It's the entire Cowboys offense when Dak Prescott got hurt. Or you can have off-field incidents like Michael Thomas punching a teammate and getting benched. Or you could have Will Fuller who took performance-enhancing steroids and got suspended for the second half of the season.
He was so good. That was my guy. But yes, that's a good point. I mean, there's so many different factors that go into fantasy football. You could draft the best team out there, get so lucky, and then next thing you know, there's suspensions, injuries, benchings, trades that put you onto a worse team than you actually were on. There's so much that goes into play. Sometimes it's not even your fault. It's just unlucky. But, I mean, that's just what happens in fantasy football.
I think the last impactful trade that happened mid-season, I was looking back at it, nothing really happened last year. No one big offensively traded teams. But the year before that, 2019, the Dolphins traded Kenyon Drake to the Cardinals, and then Kenyon Drake quickly became a league-winning running back if you were able to pick him up off of waivers and you needed to fill that RB2 spot.
That actually might have been the last time something crazy like that. And he was amazing. He was like 30 points a game.
Oh, he was going off.
He won the championship for someone in my other league because he was just dropping like 35 a game in the playoffs.
Tip number 7. Here's our last tip for our beginners out there. Understanding how free agency or your waiver wire works. Waiver wire. I can't spell or pronounce words. So there's priority ranking, or there's a term called FAB, which gets thrown out there a lot. So priority ranking is the default ranking. So Brian, you have a lot of experience with that. So can you walk me through what that is?
Yeah, so free agents, pretty much everyone gets a certain waiver at the beginning of the season. And again, if you're in a 10-team league, everyone's ranked 1 to 10 through a waiver wire. Let's say for whatever reason, Tom Brady's on the waiver wire, and I want Tom Brady. If I have the 1 waiver, I have the first rights to be able to get Tom Brady. If I'm the 7 waiver, I have the 7th priority to get him. You don't know who's has a waiver on that player, but if you have a higher waiver wire than someone, then you have the right to be able to get them. However, say I'm the 1 waiver and I end up getting Tom Brady and no one else picked up anyone else. I then move down to the bottom and I'm now 10 and everyone moves up 1. So then it just keeps going all season. If you don't pick anyone up, you're going to have a higher waiver wire than someone else. And if you pick up a lot of guys, you're probably going to be at 10. And when that big guy jumps on the free agency, you're probably not going to end up getting him.
No. There's also free agent bidding, or FAB as they call it. And I'll walk through that one because I'm trying to convince this league to try it.
I mean, I barely even know it, so maybe you could try to convince me.
We'll get into the specifics of this in the advanced episode, but the basics of the way free agent bidding works is each manager starts out the year with a budget. So let's call it, every manager gets $100, and they can bid on players on the waiver wire. So for example, week 1 comes on, there's a guy who explodes off of the waiver wire. Everyone wants him. It doesn't matter if you're at the bottom of waiver wire or you're at the top. It's whoever bids the most on that player gets the rights to be on his team. But the key to this is you don't get more money throughout the season. So it basically puts stress on the decision, do I really need this player? Then I'm going to bid a lot on him. Do I not need this player a lot, but I might like him on my team? You bid less. And the way a tiebreaker is decided, the team that's lower in the rankings gets the player.
So you can't see how much money someone put on that bid?
You can't. You can only bid on him yourself.
Oh, I kind of like that. Okay.
So the reason why I kind of like this is because this is a scenario that it benefits the fantasy managers who put a lot more attention into it and eliminates all the unnecessary transactions. Or for example, let's say you need to start a guy, but you don't know which one of these 3 guys you need to start. Instead of having to pick up a guy and cut one, then switch your decision later on or you might not be able to switch your decision later on because you could be the 3rd waiver priority, but that sends you down to 10th. You could put in a $0 bid and you don't have to worry about you're losing out on the guy the next week if you need the guy who's going to blow up the next week kind of situation. What this also helps is prevents you from having to really clog up your roster with handcuff pieces. For example, last year, no one would have drafted Mike Davis as Christian McCaffrey's handcuff. Christian McCaffrey goes down. If you're the Christian McCaffrey owner, you probably had the 1st pick, so that means you're waiver wire 10, which means you're not going to get Mike Davis. So as the Christian McCaffrey owner, you know that you need that production. You could bid an outrageous amount to make sure you get Mike Davis so your team is still competitive. And it's basically if another player really wants to try to screw you up, they can spend most of their fab on Mike Davis instead. So it's kind of just...
I like that.
It makes it a lot more competitive, and you don't have to get into that hole where you keep losing your waiver wire ranking if you don't know who to pick up or guys keep getting injured if you need to fill a roster spot.
I've never played in a league. I've never seen a league that does that. I've played in hundreds of leagues, honestly, and I've never seen a league do that, but I like the idea of it. I think it'd be pretty competitive to be able to do.
So that kind of wraps up like our 7 tips for our beginners out there. We're going to keep making a few more videos talking more about how you know to research, how you should draft strategies, and a few more advanced tips. Just to wrap this all up, follow us on social media, keep track of the NFL news going on, and start your mock drafts. You don't have to do 100 like I already have. But if you do like one or once a week to get an idea of where guys are right now, because it's going to change over the next 2 months, just kind of stay on top of it. Do you have any last words, Brian?
Just keep up with the news and look at the rankings, look at the stats, look at the up-and-coming players, sleepers, everything that goes into fantasy football. Read a couple fantasy football articles and watch ESPN every now and then. You'll be just fine.
But don't draft on ESPN.
Cheers, Brian.